The Pacific sun had already begun sinking behind the shimmering ocean when 19-year-old William Billy Carter tightened the strap of his flight goggles and listened to the low hum of his P-38 Lightning. To the men on the island, he was the farm kid from Iowa, a boy raised in cornfields, who could fix a tractor engine with his eyes closed, ride a horse bareback, and shoot tin cans from 50 yards without missing. But to the war machine of the Pacific, he was just another young pilot thrown into the chaos of World War II. Billy had never imagined he would end up fighting thousands of miles from home. Until 2 years earlier, he had never even seen the ocean. His world had been barns, dust roads, and the soft creak of wooden porches. But the war changed everything, and when the call came, he traded the farm for the cockpit of a twin-engine fighter that could climb like lightning and strike like thunder. On that warm and uneasy evening, Billy sat quietly in his aircraft, waiting for orders, unaware that within the next hour he would face the largest and most terrifying air attack he had ever seen. And by the end of that day, he would perform a maneuver so strange, so desperate, so utterly unbelievable, that veteran pilots would later insist no sane man would ever try it. They would call it luck, instinct, madness, genius. No one could agree. But they all agreed on one thing. It saved his life and turned a farm boy into a legend. The radio crackled, breaking the calm. All pilots, scramble. Radar shows incoming bogies, large formation. Real large. Billy felt his heartbeat thump inside his chest. He pushed the throttles forward, and the P-38 roared across the runway. Dust flared behind him as the wheels lifted from the ground, and seconds later he burst into the fading golden sky. At first, he saw nothing. Only the endless ocean stretching beneath him like a sheet of glass. But then dots. Dozens of dots. Then more. Like a swarm of insects rising out of a storm. Dear God. Billy whispered. 40 Japanese aircraft, Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo planes flying in tight formation, moving toward the Allied fleet anchored near the island. Their engines produced a deep, rolling growl that felt almost alive. Billy had 30 seconds to act. His squadron was too far behind. He was the only pilot in range, one pilot against 40 enemy planes. The voice of his commanding officer came through the radio. Carter, do not engage alone. Do you hear me? Fall back. Repeat, do not engage. But Billy didn't fall back. He pushed the throttles even farther. Something inside him, something he didn't understand, refused to let him turn away. He thought of his friends in the fleet below, the men repairing ships, loading supplies, eating dinner. If those bombers reached the harbor, hundreds would die. He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't a hero. He was a kid from a farm who had been taught one thing his whole life. You don't walk away. When someone needs help, he dove straight into the incoming formation. The Japanese pilots were stunned. One P-38, slicing through the clouds, heading right for them as if the pilot had lost his mind. They didn't break formation. Not at first. They couldn't believe a single fighter would challenge them alone. Billy fired a burst. The tracers blazed past his canopy, tearing into a bomber engine. The aircraft erupted in flame and spiraled into the waves. The formation wobbled. They spread out. And then the swarm turned angry. Now they all came for him. Billy rolled hard left, dodging bullets that flashed like sparks against the sky. The air around him filled with the deafening rattle of machine gun fire. His aircraft shuddered with every near hit. He fired again. Another bomber fell. He looped upward, and a Zero followed him. Billy banked sharply, pulled into a dive, and squeezed the trigger. Smoke filled the air as a third plane spiraled out of control. But for every enemy he hit, 3 more closed in. He had no backup. No time. No plan. Just instinct. He weaved and twisted, but the Japanese pilots were closing from all sides. Bright flashes streaked past his canopy, gunfire coming from every direction. The radio kept yelling for him to retreat, but he ignored it. He couldn't run now. He was too deep inside the formation, and the planes were tightening around him like a net. A zero swooped above him. Another slid into position beneath him. A third was closing from behind. He was surrounded. Billy's fuel gauge rattled violently. Smoke trailed from his right engine. Holes tore across his wings like moth bites in old cloth. Even if he wanted to escape, the sky had become a cage. A perfect trap. Then something happened, a moment so strange and so fast that Billy would later struggle to explain it. A memory flashed in his mind. Not of war, but of home. On the farm, he used to chase crows with his dad's old truck. If he cornered a group of them near the cornfields, they scattered in confusion, flapping wildly, crashing into each other. They were fast, but when they panicked, they became unpredictable. He realized something. If he panicked, he would die. But if he made them panic, he might have a chance. So Billy did the most insane thing any pilot had ever attempted in a real dogfight. He cut his engine stock completely. The P-38 suddenly dropped like a stone, falling out of the sky. To the Japanese pilots, it looked like a stall, a death spiral, a move no trained pilot would ever choose. Zeros shot past him, overshooting their positions. Bombers veered off track. For a moment, the entire formation broke apart, confused. Pilots yelled over their radios, trying to understand what had happened. Billy felt his stomach rise into his throat as the aircraft plunged downward. The wind screamed past the canopy. The ground rushed toward him. He waited until the last possible second. Then he slammed the throttles forward. The P-38's engines exploded back to life. The aircraft jolted upward, skimming just above the waves. Spray splashed against his windshield. And just ahead of him, perfectly lined up from the chaos he had created, were the bombers that had lost their formation and were struggling to regroup. Billy opened fire. 3 went down instantly. Japanese swarm tried to reorganize, but it was too late. Billy had shattered their formation, split their attack wave, and forced them into a scattered mess. And once they lost formation, their advantage evaporated. He shot down another. Then another. He weaved through the mess like a blade cutting through fabric. When his squadron finally arrived, they were stunned. They saw burning wreckage across the ocean, and a lone P-38 slicing through smoke trails like a ghost. Billy Carter had done the impossible, something no young pilot had ever attempted. But the battle wasn't over. Far from it. The sky was still crawling with enemy fighters, and Billy was about to face the deadliest counterattack of the entire Pacific War. Billy barely had time to catch his breath before another wave of Japanese fighters closed in. His right engine was coughing smoke, his left wing was riddled with holes, and his ammunition was running dangerously low. The ocean below glimmered red beneath the burning aircraft drifting toward the waves. The battle had only lasted minutes, but it felt like hours. His squadron finally reached him, spreading out across the sky, shouting through the radio as the battle intensified. Billy didn't answer. He was too focused. Every second mattered. Every move was a balance between survival and disaster. The Japanese pilots, furious at the chaos Billy had caused, singled him out. 3 Zeros locked onto him, diving from above like arrows. Billy pulled up sharply, his aircraft groaning under the strain. The world blurred. His vision darkened. But he held the climb, forcing the enemy pilots to follow. He twisted at the top of the climb, cutting across the path of the first Zero. A split-second burst from his guns shredded its wing. It spiraled into a second Zero, both aircraft vanishing in a burst of flame. Billy looped downward and struck the third as it overshot, a move so precise it seemed impossible given his damage controls. But he was running out of time. His fuel gauge was dropping. His ammunition counter was blinking empty. And the last cluster of Japanese bombers, now aware of the threat, were diving toward the Allied fleet. If even a handful broke through, the destruction would be catastrophic. Billy pushed the throttles again, coaxing every ounce of power from the lightning. He climbed above the bombers, positioning himself directly in the sun. It was a trick pilots learned early. Sunlight blinds an enemy faster than bullets. As the bombers crossed beneath him, he dove at full speed, opening fire from above. Two more bombers fell before he heard the dreaded metallic click. Empty. 30 planes were already burning below him. 10 more remained. Most pilots would have broken off. Most pilots would have retreated. But Billy Carter was not most pilots. He dove again, without ammunition, flying straight at the bombers. The Japanese pilots, believing he intended to ram them, panicked and swerved. Their formation collapsed once more, leaving the dive-bombing run broken and useless. Their window of attack was closing. The Allied anti-aircraft guns below began firing, shredding the scattered bombers one by one. The fleet survived because the formation never reformed. Billy had no bullets left, but he wasn't finished. A lone zero came at him from behind. Billy jerked the stick, but the aircraft responded sluggishly. Smoke billowed from his right engine. Then a bullet smashed through his cockpit glass, slicing across his arm. The pain was sharp and searing, but he didn't lose control. He gritted his teeth and pulled the aircraft into a desperate corkscrew maneuver, his damaged lightning moaning under the strain. The Zero followed tightly, firing in bursts. Sparks flew across Billy's tail fins. Billy knew he couldn't outrun it. He couldn't outshoot it. But there was one thing he could do. He repeated the trick. He cut his engines again. The P-38 dropped. The Zero overshot. Billy reignited the engines. He pulled up behind the Zero, now perfectly lined in his sights. No ammunition, but one last chance. He tilted the aircraft, letting his prop blades chew into the Zero's tail. Metal screamed. The enemy fighter broke apart, plunging into the sea. Billy barely recovered control. The collision nearly snapped his blade. His aircraft shook violently, and one engine finally died for good. Flames flickered along the right side. He tilted toward the ocean, struggling to keep altitude. His radio came alive with frantic voices. "Carter, bail out. Jump while you can. Billy, get out of that plane." But he didn't jump. He fought the controls, guiding the damaged Lightning toward the island. Smoke filled the cockpit. The engine sputtered like a wounded animal. His vision blurred as he forced the aircraft down, landing hard on the strip. The wheels collapsed. The plane skidded, bounced, and slid until it finally came to rest in a cloud of dirt and dust. Silence. The ground crew sprinted across the runway. They wrenched open the cockpit canopy and found Billy slumped inside. Exhausted, bleeding, but alive. Above the island. The sky was empty. 40 Japanese aircraft had launched the attack. Between Billy and the reinforcements, not one made it back to base. Days later, senior officers interviewed him, trying to understand how he had survived. Experienced pilots were stunned by his improvisation, cutting engines mid-battle, diving through formations, drawing fire away from his squadron, and breaking the bomber attack wave single-handedly. One old colonel shook his head and said, "That kid didn't fly a plane. He wrestled the sky." Reporters called him the farm kid ace. Pilots called him the feather because he dropped like one and rose just as fast. Historians would later call his maneuver the wildest trick of the Pacific Air War. But Billy Carter never cared about any of that. When he was asked why he dove alone into the wave of enemy aircraft, he always gave the same answer. "I saw 40 planes heading toward the boys on the ground, and no one else was there yet." Someone had to do something. Asterisk he returned home after the war to the same quiet farm he had left behind. He never wrote a book, never gave a glamorous interview. But among pilots, the legend lived on. The farm kid who challenged 40 planes alone. The pilot who invented a crazy trick that made enemies panic. Asterisk. The young man who turned instinct into survival, and survival into history. And though his name rarely appears in textbooks, his story echoes in every hangar, every museum, every place where the quiet courage of ordinary men is remembered. Asterisk. In the vast skies of World War II, where thousands fought and fell, one farm kid performed the impossible, and the sky never forgot him.